There is a particular kind of love that does not live in the present. It lives in the future. It thinks forward. It moves through the days and the years with one eye always on what is coming, not for itself, but for the person it belongs to. It makes plans quietly. It sets things in motion without announcement. It builds something and then steps back and lets time deliver it. Long after the hands that built it are gone. Steve Harvey has hosted Family Feud for over a decade. He has sat across from thousands of families. He has heard things that made him laugh until he could not stand up. He has heard things that made him reach for someone's hand without thinking about the cameras. But on a Monday afternoon in April 2024, in a studio in Atlanta, Georgia, a 96-year-old man from Birmingham, Alabama sat across from Steve Harvey and told him something that no one in that room, not his daughter, not his grandson, not his great-granddaughter, had ever heard before. A secret his wife had kept from him for the last 18 months of her life. A secret she had taken with her when she passed. A secret that had been sitting quietly, waiting to be delivered, the way she had planned it, in its own time, through its own channels, without her there to see his face when he found out. When Walter Gibson finished telling it, Steve Harvey put his face in his hands. Then he stood up. Then he sat back down. Then he stood up again. And the studio audience, 400 people who had come to watch a game show on a Monday afternoon, sat in complete silence for the longest 20 seconds in Family Feud history. This is the story of Walter and Ruth Gibson. And it begins not in a studio. It begins in a house in rural Alabama that no longer exists the way it once was, and then does again, because of one woman who spent the last chapter of her life making sure it would. He, Walter James Gibson, was born in 1928 in a small farming community outside of Birmingham, Alabama, the fourth of 7 children. His father sharecropped on land that belonged to someone else, the way most men in that county did in those years. And he worked it from before sunrise to after sunset 6 days a week with a patience and endurance that Walter would spend the rest of his life trying to understand and emulate. The house where Walter grew up was modest by any standard. 2 rooms, a porch that ran the full length of the front, a well in the side yard, a kitchen garden that his mother kept with the precision of someone who understood that what grew in that garden was the difference between enough and not enough. The house sat back from a dirt road beneath 2 large oak trees that his grandfather had planted before Walter was born, and on summer evenings the whole family would sit on that porch after supper and watch the Alabama sky go through its colors. And Walter would think, even as a child, even without the words for it, that there was nowhere on earth more beautiful than right here. His father told him once, sitting on that porch in the late evening, that a man could go anywhere he needed to go in this world. He could travel far and build things and make something of himself in places his father had never seen. But he should always know where his roots were, always know which ground his family came from, because the day he forgot that, he would start to lose something he could not name and could not get back. Walter never forgot it. He left Alabama in 1950 at the age of 22, following work north to Birmingham and then further north to Cincinnati, Ohio, where a cousin had found him a position in a manufacturing plant. The work was steady and the pay was better than anything available back home. And Walter went because that was what responsible young men did in 1950. They followed opportunity, and they sent money home, and they built toward something. He never went back to live in Alabama. The years became decades. His parents passed. His siblings scattered. The house on the dirt road sat empty, then half empty, then abandoned entirely as the land changed hands and the road was rerouted and the 2 oak trees kept growing without anyone underneath them to watch the evening sky. Walter thought about that house more often than he ever told anyone. He thought about it when he was tired. He thought about it when something was hard. He thought about it in the particular way that a person thinks about the place where they first understood what home felt like. Not with grief exactly, but with a specific, quiet weight that never fully lifted. He met Ruth Elaine Patterson in Cincinnati in 1952. She was 24 years old. She worked at a laundry. She was the daughter of a Baptist minister from Georgia. And she had inherited from him the particular combination of absolute moral clarity and complete absence of judgment that is the rarest and most valuable quality a human being can carry. Ruth Gibson did not tell people what they should do. She just lived in a way that made you want to be better, and she did it without trying and without knowing she was doing it. Walter fell in love with her on their second conversation. The first conversation had been brief, an introduction through mutual friends, a few exchanged words, nothing remarkable. The second was at a church social where they ended up talking for 3 hours without noticing the time pass. She told him about her father's sermons. He told her about the porch in Alabama and the oak trees, and the way the sky looked in the evenings. She listened the way she listened to everything, with her full attention, as though what he was saying was the most interesting thing she had heard all week. He proposed 4 months later. She said yes before he finished asking. They were married in January 1953. They built a life in Cincinnati in the steady, deliberate way of two people who understood the value of what they were building. Walter worked his way from the plant floor to a supervisory position over 22 years, then transitioned to a maintenance role with the city that he held until retirement in 1990. Ruth raised their 3 children, Carolyn, James Jr., and baby Marcus, who passed at 3 years old from a fever, a loss that reshaped both of them in ways they spoke of rarely but carried always. And she kept their home with the same attention and intentionality she gave to everything she loved. They were married for 68 years. 68 years. Through the death of their son. Through moves and job changes and decades that brought more hardship than ease. Through the slow accumulation of everything that builds a life, the good years and the hard ones and the ordinary ones in between that somehow end up being the most precious of all when you look back on them. Ruth was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer in the fall of 2022. She had been quietly short of breath for months and had not said so until she was certain enough to go to the doctor, which was completely consistent with who she had always been. The diagnosis was delivered in October. The prognosis was careful but honest. Treatment could manage it, but not reverse it. She was 94 years old. Her body had already given most of what it had. Ruth received the news the way she received most difficult information, with stillness. She asked the doctor the right questions. She thanked him. She went home with Walter and she cooked dinner, and after they ate, she sat across from him at the kitchen table and said, "I want to talk to you about something." Walter looked at her. "You know, I have always believed," she said, "that the most important thing a person can leave behind is not money or property. It is the feeling they gave to the people who loved them. The feeling of having been known and taken care of." She folded her hands on the table. "I have been thinking about what I can do. What I can leave you that will mean something real." Walter started to say something. She raised one hand slightly, the quiet gesture she had always used that meant, "Let me finish. I know what you carry," she said. "I have known for 68 years. You carry that house in Alabama. You carry that porch and those oak trees and the sound of your father's voice on summer evenings. You have never said so plainly, but I know." She looked at him steadily. "I want to do something about it." He did not know what she meant. He assumed she meant she wanted them to make a trip south before she was too ill to travel. He started thinking about logistics, about whether he was still able to drive that far, about which grandchildren might come along. He assumed wrong. What Ruth meant, what Ruth was already in the process of doing before she had said a word of it to Walter, was something else entirely. In September 2022, 6 weeks before her official diagnosis and while she was still managing her symptoms quietly, Ruth had found the name of a historical preservation organization in Alabama that worked to restore and preserve abandoned rural properties with cultural and community significance. She had called them from the kitchen telephone on a Tuesday afternoon while Walter was at his weekly dominoes game with friends. She told them about the house, about the 2 oak trees, about the farming community and the family history, and the man who had left Alabama in 1950 and never stopped thinking about the porch where he had watched the sky go down every evening of his childhood. They were interested. Over the next 18 months, while she was receiving treatment, while her energy diminished and her good days became shorter and her difficult days became longer, Ruth Gibson made phone calls and sent emails with her granddaughter Imani's help, and wrote letters in her careful, deliberate handwriting to people in Alabama she had never met. She negotiated. She arranged. She used the proceeds of a small life insurance policy she had quietly cashed out. $22,000. Money she had not touched in 30 years, money Walter did not know existed, to fund the initial restoration work. She never told Walter, not when the preservation organization confirmed they had located the property, not when the restoration work began in the spring of 2023, not when Imani, who was the only family member Ruth had brought into the secret, swearing her to complete silence, sent her photographs of the progress on a tablet she kept in her nightstand. Ruth looked at those photographs in her bedroom while Walter watched television in the next room. She looked at the oak trees being cleared of overgrowth. She looked at the porch being rebuilt from its original dimensions. She looked at the dirt road being accessible again. And she looked at all of it with the expression of a woman who is watching something she loves be given back to the person she loves most. She passed away in February 2024. She was 95 years old. She died in the bedroom of their Cincinnati home with Walter holding her hand and Carolyn sitting on her other side and the winter morning light coming through the curtains she had picked out in 1987 and never changed because she liked them. The preservation organization sent Walter a letter 3 weeks later. He was sitting at the kitchen table when he read it. He read it once. He set it down. He picked it up and read it again. He sat at the table for a long time after that, in the way a man sits when the ground has shifted under him and he is waiting to understand what he is standing on now. Then he called his daughter Carolyn into the kitchen, and he handed her the letter. And then he told her, "Your mother did this." The Family Feud invitation had been Carolyn's idea. She was 66 years old, the oldest of the Gibson children, and she had been watching her father navigate the months since Ruth's passing with the particular helpless love of a child watching a parent in a grief that no child can reach into and fix. Walter had continued his routines, the dominoes game, the Tuesday morning coffee with the deacon from his church, the evening news. With the same precision that had always defined him. He was not broken. He was not falling apart. He was simply moving through each day with a man-sized grief that he wore quietly and would not be persuaded to put down. Carolyn had submitted the Family Feud application in January before the letter from Alabama arrived. She had done it on an impulse that felt, she said later, like something she could not explain exactly. Just a sense that her father needed something forward-facing. Something that would give the family a reason to get together and make noise and be alive in each other's presence in a way that sitting around talking about Ruth could not quite achieve. She told Walter about it over Sunday dinner. Walter looked at her. "Family Feud," he said. "Yes, Daddy, the television program. Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I have watched that show every day for 20 years, he said. "I know," Carolyn said. "Every evening at 6:30. "I know." He picked up his fork. "All right," he said. He did not tell Carolyn about the letter from Alabama. Not yet. He had been sitting with it for 2 weeks. He was still figuring out the shape of it, what it meant. What it said about the woman who had spent 68 years being exactly who she had always been, right up to the very last quiet arrangement she made before she let go. The team assembled for the taping was 4: Walter, Carolyn, Carolyn's son Darnell, who was 41 and worked in urban planning in Atlanta and had his grandfather's steadiness and his grandmother's way of paying genuine attention to people, and Darnell's daughter Imani, who was 23 and knew the secret that no one else in the family knew, and had been carrying it with remarkable composure for the better part of 18 months. The drive to the Atlanta studio was 3 hours from Cincinnati, broken up with a stop for lunch at a diner outside Chattanooga. Walter ate a full meal and drank 2 cups of coffee and told Darnell a story about his years working maintenance for the city of Cincinnati that Darnell had not heard before, which was notable because Darnell had thought he had heard all of them. Imani sat across the table and watched her great-grandfather tell the story and thought about the photographs on the tablet in his bedroom nightstand and thought about what her grandmother had done and felt the weight of it sitting quietly inside her chest where she had been keeping it. She had promised. She kept the promise. The studio was large and warm and moving with the particular organized energy of a place that produces television professionally and efficiently. The production team greeted Walter with the kind of genuine warmth that goes beyond professional courtesy. Someone had clearly passed information through the right channels because the attention they gave him was specific and real. His chair in the green room was positioned with care. The temperature was adjusted when he mentioned it was slightly cool. Steve Harvey's segment producer came in personally, shook Walter's hand, and told him that it was an honor to have him on the show. "Thank you," Walter said. "I have watched your program every evening for 20 years. 6:30, Carolyn added. The producer smiled. "Well, tonight you'll be on the other side of it." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," he said. Ruth would have found that very funny. The opposing family was the Morales family from Decatur, Georgia. 4 generations themselves. Energetic and well-prepared, and bringing considerable noise to the first minutes of the main game. They were quick on the buzzer, and their teenage granddaughter had clearly spent time studying the most common survey answers, which gave them an edge in the opening round that pushed the Gibson family into an early deficit. Carolyn was steady and precise. She did not always get the number 1 answer, but she consistently got answers that were on the board, which was its own kind of value. Darnell got a strong answer in the second round that pulled significant points and shifted the energy in the room. He had his grandfather's way of appearing calm under pressure that the audience responded to, the particular quality of someone who does not change when the stakes go up. And then there was Walter. 96 years old. In a dark gray suit that Ruth had helped him select for Carolyn's retirement party in 2019. Upright the way men of his generation were upright. Not stiff, not performing anything, just carrying themselves the way they had been taught that a person ought to carry themselves. He stood at the podium in the 3rd round when it was his turn, and he placed both hands on the edge of it, and he waited. Steve Harvey walked toward him slowly. He did not rush it. He stopped in front of Walter, and he looked at him the way you look at someone when you understand, without being told, that there is more in the room than what you can see. "Sir," Steve said, quietly with actual respect. "Young man," Walter said. The audience laughed, warm, immediate, the laugh of people who recognize something true. 96 years old, Steve said. 96, Walter confirmed. "And still here." "Still here," Steve repeated. He smiled. "How do you feel?" "I feel like a man who has had a very good life," Walter said simply, "and is not yet finished with it." The audience responded to that. Not with loud applause, with something quieter, the sound a room makes when it has received something it needed. Walter answered his question. Name something a man does every day out of pure habit. With checks the weather, which landed as the number 3 answer and brought in 24 points and caused Carolyn to exhale in relief on the side of the stage. The Gibson family won the main game on the strength of a final round where Darnell answered 2 questions in rapid succession and Imani, calm, focused, deliberately not thinking about the secret she was carrying, got the number 1 answer on a question about family traditions that she answered with Sunday dinner in the tone of someone for whom Sunday dinner is not an abstraction. Final score, Gibson family 318, Morales family 279. Carolyn put both hands in the air. Darnell laughed with the full-body release of someone who has been holding tension for 2 hours. Imani glanced at her great-grandfather and found him smiling in the small, private way he smiled when something was exactly as it should be. Before Fast Money, Steve Harvey did his walk down the contestant line. He talked to Carolyn about her father. He talked to Darnell about Atlanta. He talked to Imani about being the youngest person on the team and whether that felt like pressure. She said no. He said he believed her. The audience believed her too. Then Steve walked to Walter. He did not rush this. He pulled the low chair over, the same instinct that had moved him before, and he sat, bringing himself to Walter's level. The audience went slightly quieter, the way they did when they understood that something was about to be different. "Mr. Gibson," Steve said. 68 years married. 68 years, Walter said. "Ruth and I. Tell me about her." Walter considered the question the way he considered most things, genuinely, without performance. "She was," he said slowly, "the most patient person I ever knew. Not patient in the way people use that word, meaning she could wait for things. Patient in the real sense. She could hold space for a person. She could sit with someone in their difficulty without needing to fix it or rush it or make it be something other than what it was." He paused. "I am not naturally that way. I am a man who likes to solve things. Ruth balanced me out." Steve nodded. 68 years, he said again, softly. "What did you learn? From being with one person that long, what did it teach you?" Walter was quiet for a moment. Around them, the studio was holding itself still. "It taught me," Walter said, "that love is not what you feel. It is what you decide. Every morning you wake up next to someone and you decide again. Some mornings it is easy. Some mornings it requires something from you." He looked at his hands. "But the deciding, that is the thing. Not the feeling. The deciding." Steve was quiet. "She sounds like she was extraordinary," he said. "She was ordinary," Walter said. "That is what made her extraordinary. She was simply and completely herself every single day for 68 years. She did not change with the weather. She was Ruth, in every season." Steve looked at him carefully. "Mr. Gibson," he said, "did she ever surprise you? In all those years, did she ever do something that you did not expect from her?" Walter Gibson looked at Steve Harvey, and something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, not the way things shift in movies, just a small, specific thing, a quality of decision. The look of a man who has been waiting for the right moment and has recognized it. "She surprised me after she was gone," he said quietly. Steve went still. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Walter reached into the inside pocket of his dark gray suit jacket. He removed a letter, folded into thirds, the envelope still attached, with a return address from a preservation organization in Birmingham, Alabama. He held it in his lap. "When I was a boy," he began, "I grew up in a house in rural Alabama, outside of Birmingham. A small house, 2 rooms and a porch. My father's family had lived on that land for 2 generations. His voice was steady and unhurried, the voice of a man who has been carrying a story for a long time and is finally ready to set it down. When I left Alabama in 1950, I always said I would go back. I always said one day I would see that house again." He paused. The years went. The house fell into disrepair. The land changed hands. I told myself the right time would come. The studio was completely silent. "The right time did not come," Walter said, "or I did not make it come. A man tells himself he has more time than he does." He looked down at the letter. "When Ruth was diagnosed with cancer in 2022, she said something to me at the kitchen table. She said she knew what I carried. She said she had always known." He stopped. He cleared his throat once. 3 weeks after she passed, he said, "I received this letter." Walter held the letter up, not toward the cameras, not performing the gesture. just making it visible to Steve and to the room. "It is from a preservation organization in Birmingham, Alabama," he said. "They wrote to tell me that the restoration of my family's home, the house where I grew up, on the land my father worked, was complete." He spoke each word with the careful deliberation of a man making sure he does not stumble over something this important. "They wrote to tell me that the work had been funded and arranged by my wife, starting in September 2022, 8 months before she passed. The studio did not make a sound. Ruth contacted them herself," Walter continued. "She found them, she called them, she explained the history of the property and why it mattered. She negotiated the arrangements over 18 months while she was undergoing treatment. She used money from a small insurance policy, money I did not know existed, to fund the initial restoration." He stopped for just a moment. "She never told me." Not one word. From September 2022 until the day she died, she was working on this. Making calls, writing letters, sending payments. His voice was still level, but carrying something just beneath the surface, the way deep water looks still from above. She arranged for the 2 oak trees my grandfather planted to be cleared and preserved. She arranged for the porch to be rebuilt to its original dimensions. She arranged for the property to be registered with the State Preservation Authority so that it would be protected. He looked down at the letter in his hands. "She did all of this so that I could go home. One more time. Before I could not." Steve Harvey put his face in both hands. He sat like that for a moment, both hands, covering his face completely, elbows on his knees, in the posture of a man who has received something that requires a physical response and has no other way to give it. Then he stood up. He walked 3 steps to the left. He stopped. He turned and walked back. He sat down again. He stood up again. The audience watched him. Not one person spoke. Not one person moved. Steve stood in the middle of his own stage and pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and looked at the ceiling and breathed. His eyes were wet in the full, uncomplicated way of a man who is not managing his emotions and has stopped trying to. He stood like that for 20 seconds that felt like much longer. Then he sat back down. He looked at Walter Gibson, 96 years old, in a dark gray suit, holding a letter from Alabama in both hands with the expression of a man who has made peace with the thing he is telling but not yet with the size of it. "She did this," Steve said. His voice was rough. "While she was sick. While she was receiving treatment," Walter confirmed. "She made phone calls to Alabama from your house. On Tuesday afternoons while I played dominoes," Walter said. "I found out from Carolyn afterward that she had also written letters. Real letters, by hand. The organization kept them. They offered to return them to me." He paused. "I said they should keep them. They are part of the history of the property now. Ruth's handwriting belongs on that land." Steve closed his eyes for just a moment. "Mr. Gibson," he said, "why do you think she kept it a secret? Why didn't she tell you?" Walter looked at him with the patience of a man for whom this question has a very clear answer. "Because if she had told me," he said, "I would have told her not to spend the money. I would have told her to save her strength. I would have found 12 reasons why it was too complicated and too expensive and not necessary." He paused. "Ruth knew me better than I knew myself. She knew that if she asked me, I would stop her. So she did not ask." He almost smiled. "She loved me enough to know when not to ask my permission." The sound that moved through the audience was not quite laughter and not quite crying. It was something in between, the sound 400 people make when something is both deeply funny and absolutely devastating in the same breath. Carolyn, at the side of the stage, was sitting down with both hands pressed over her mouth. She had known her mother her entire life, and she had not known this. 66 years of watching Ruth Gibson move through the world, and she had not known about the phone calls on Tuesday afternoons, about the letters in her mother's handwriting now living in an archive in Alabama, about the 18 months of quiet, determined love being pointed at a house on a dirt road beneath 2 oak trees. Darnell had his arm around his mother. and Imani, 23 years old, who had known, who had carried it for 18 months and said nothing, who had helped her great-grandmother navigate the tablet when the keyboard was difficult, who had seen the photographs of the progress and kept every one of them. Imani was standing very still with tears running down her face that she was not trying to stop. Steve Harvey saw her. He looked at Imani directly. He saw something in her face, not surprise. The absence of surprise. "Young lady," he said carefully, "did you know?" Imani looked at her great-grandfather. Walter looked back at her with an expression of complete and uncomplicated love. "Grandma Ruth told me," Imani said. Her voice was steady even though her face was not. "She made me promise not to say anything until great-grandpa was ready to tell it himself." She stopped. She said he would know when the moment was right. Steve Harvey looked at Walter. "And this was the moment," Steve said. "Family Feud," Walter said simply. "She always said it was good television. She would have approved of this setting." That was the moment the audience finally broke. It was not a loud breaking. It was the deep, sustained, full-room sound of 400 people simultaneously recognizing something they had felt but not been able to name, the particular thing that happens when love is revealed to be larger than anyone present had understood it to be, and the revelation is both wonderful and almost more than a person can hold. Steve Harvey stood up one more time. He did not walk away this time. He stood in front of Walter Gibson and he looked at him for a long moment. "Sir," he said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me." "I am always honest," Walter said. "When you read that letter from Alabama," Steve said, "when you understood what she had done, what did you feel?" Walter thought about it the way he thought about important things. "I felt," he said, slowly, "that I had spent 68 years thinking I knew the full size of her love, and I found out that I had been underestimating it the entire time." He held the letter. A man lives with a woman for 68 years, and he believes he sees her clearly. He believes he knows what she is capable of. He shook his head slowly. "Ruth was always larger than what I could see. I just could not see all of her from where I was standing." Steve Harvey pressed his hand flat over his heart. He turned to the audience. He tried twice to start speaking. Both times he stopped. On the third try, his voice was quiet enough that the microphone had to work to carry it. "I don't have a prepared response to what just happened," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I have been on this stage a long time and I always have something to say." He stopped. "Right now I do not. Right now all I have is..." He stopped again. "A woman named Ruth Gibson was sick and she was dying, and instead of spending her energy on herself, she spent it tracking down a piece of land in Alabama and making phone calls on Tuesday afternoons and writing letters in her handwriting that are now preserved in an archive because she wanted her husband to be able to go home." His voice cracked. Just once, just briefly. "She did not do it for recognition. She set it up to arrive after she was gone. She was not going to see his face when he found out. She just did it. And then she let go." He looked at Walter. "That is not love as a feeling. That is love as a final act. Love as the last thing you do before you leave." Carolyn was fully weeping on the side of the stage. Darnell held her. Imani stood with her hand over her heart and her great-grandmother's face in her memory and the photographs of the rebuilt porch on a tablet in a bedroom in Cincinnati. The executive producer stepped forward. The $20,000 prize was confirmed, and Family Feud was making an additional contribution of $15,000 in Ruth Gibson's name to the Alabama Preservation Organization that had restored Walter's family home. Walter received this quietly. He folded the letter back along its original creases. He placed it back in his jacket pocket. Then he reached in again and removed one more thing. A photograph, printed small, slightly worn, the kind a man carries because he needs to carry it. Ruth in the backyard of their Cincinnati home, summer, laughing at something off camera. the laugh of a woman who found genuine delight in the ordinary afternoon that contained it. He held it briefly, not for the audience, just held it the way a person holds the thing that matters most. Steve Harvey looked at the photograph. He did not say anything. He simply placed his hand on Walter's shoulder and left it there. The episode aired on a Wednesday evening in May. By the following morning, the clip of Walter saying she surprised me after she was gone had been viewed 14 million times. It moved across platforms with the quiet, unstoppable speed of things that are simply and undeniably true. There were no special effects, no dramatic music cue, no manufactured tension. There was just a 96-year-old man in a dark gray suit holding a letter from Alabama and telling a story that his wife had arranged for him to tell from the other side of her own life. The comment that appeared beneath every version of the clip, shared, reshared, translated into 14 languages within 72 hours, was written by someone who left no name. She knew she was leaving, so she made sure he had somewhere to go back to. She gave him his beginning so he could finish well. That is the whole of love right there. It was shared 6 million times. Walter went to Alabama in June. Carolyn drove him. Darnell came. Imani sat in the back seat and watched her great-grandfather watch the landscape change as they moved south, the particular change of the land as Alabama asserts itself. The quality of the light, the color of the soil. Things that do not announce themselves but are simply there for the people who know what to look for. They turned off the highway onto a county road. The county road became a smaller road. The smaller road became the dirt road that had been cleared and graded and made accessible again by the people Ruth had called from a Cincinnati kitchen on Tuesday afternoons. And then Walter saw the oak trees. His grandfather had planted them before he was born. They were enormous now. The kind of enormous that only a century of growth can produce. They stood on either side of the drive, arching toward each other, and in the morning light of a June day in Alabama, they were exactly as beautiful as a 96-year-old man had been carrying them in his memory for 74 years. The house behind them was modest and clean and rebuilt with careful attention to what it had originally been. The porch ran the full length of the front. The well had been preserved as a historical feature. The kitchen garden had been planted again by the preservation organization, something Ruth had specifically requested, according to the notes in her file that they shared with the family. Walter walked to the porch and sat down in the chair that had been placed there. He sat and he looked at the Alabama morning coming through the oak trees his grandfather had planted. He sat for a long time. Carolyn stood with Darnell and Imani at the edge of the drive and let him have it, the moment her mother had built for him. The quiet she had arranged from a hospital bed. The homecoming she had put in motion so that the man she had loved for 68 years could sit on this porch one more time and hear his father's voice in the trees. When Walter finally stood up, he was not hurried about it. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked out at the road and the trees and the sky above them. She was always right, he said. It was not aimed at anyone in particular. Then he walked back to the car. Steve Harvey talked about the Gibsons on his radio program the Monday after the episode aired. He did not plan a long segment. He brought it up near the end of the show, in the space he sometimes used for things he was still working out in his own head. I stood up and sat down and stood up again, he said, on my own stage. Because there was no way to receive what that man said while staying in one place. He was quiet for a moment. Ruth Gibson spent 18 months of her dying making phone calls to Alabama, writing letters by hand, arranging things she was not going to live to see delivered. And she did it in secret because she loved him enough to know that he would stop her if she asked. He paused. That is the kind of love that does not ask for anything back. It does not need to see your face when it lands. It just sends itself forward and trusts. He stopped. I think about my mother when I think about Ruth Gibson, he said finally. The quiet work, the arrangements made without announcement, the love that shows up after the person is gone and you realize it was always this big. You just could not see all of it at once. He did not say anything else on the subject. The preservation organization in Alabama named a small exhibit after Ruth Gibson, a room in their visitor center dedicated to the stories of families who had reconnected with abandoned properties through the organization's work. Her letters were displayed there, framed in her careful handwriting. The exhibit opened in September and drew visitors who had seen the Family Feud clip and driven to Birmingham specifically to stand in the room where her words were. Imani graduated from her university program in May and started working in documentary production in Atlanta. Her first project was a short film about her great-grandmother. She filmed Walter on the porch in Alabama. She filmed the oak trees in the morning light. She filmed Carolyn reading one of Ruth's letters for the first time. The organization had allowed the family to receive copies, and she filmed Walter holding the photograph of Ruth laughing in the backyard in summer. She did not try to explain what Ruth had done or why. She let the images say it. The film was 12 minutes long. It was accepted to a regional film festival in the fall. The night it screened, the audience sat in silence for nearly a full minute after it ended before anyone began to applaud. Walter Gibson sat in the front row. Carolyn sat beside him. When the lights came up, someone near the back of the theater started clapping, and everyone followed. And the old man in the front row sat very still and received it in the particular way of a man who understands that the applause is not for him. It was for Ruth. It had always been for Ruth. Everything that had come from that appearance, the letter, the house, the film, the room full of people on a fall evening standing for a woman they had never met. All of it traced back to a Tuesday afternoon in September 2022, a kitchen telephone, and a woman who had decided that the most important use of her remaining time was to make sure the man she loved had somewhere to go after she was gone. She had not needed to see it happen. She had trusted it would find him. It did. That is what Ruth Gibson knew that most people spend their whole lives trying to learn. That love, real love, does not live in the present tense. It lives in the arrangements you make, in the letters you write, in the phone calls you make on Tuesday afternoons to organizations in states you have never visited, for a house on a dirt road you have only heard described, beneath 2 oak trees you have only known through the voice of a man telling you what they looked like in the evening light. It lives in the future, in the time after you, in the homecoming you build for someone before you go.